I'm Patrick Gavin, Politico. It is now time to turn the table with Nancy Cordes of CBS News. Nancy, let's get your take on the President's State of the Union address. It got very low ratings, but from your perspective in terms of the kind of message he was sending out to Congress, what were some of your takeaways from that address?
I thought it was a kind of gentle State of the Union. I felt that he was making a conscious effort not to go after Republicans. There were a lot of areas where he could have and where you thought he was when it came to things like the government shutdown or unemployment benefits that have expired, but he really held back and said, Congress needs to get this done. And he didn't take aim at Republicans in the way that he maybe has in years past. And he did also stress areas where there's no possible way for people to disagree, talking, for example, about the fact that women need to make as much as men do, or the fact that someone who works full time shouldn't be living in poverty. These are things that got a lot of applause from both sides. And I think in a way he sort of surprised Republicans because what they had heard going into this speech was that he was going to threaten to go around them if they didn't work with him. He did still make that threat, but it wasn't quite as pointed as they expected.
One other interesting thing that I noticed, and I don't have the exact numbers on it, is Obamacare didn't really get addressed until fairly deep into the speech. Were you surprised at the kind of play it got or didn't get during that address?
I was surprised. I thought he was going to get into more detail about how it's improving, about how many people are now signing up, about the future of Obamacare. He spoke in generalities about it, as you described, but he didn't really make this full-throated endorsement of the program and all the ways that it's going to work in the future. He did, of course, say, people with pre-existing conditions no longer have to worry about their insurance being dropped, but that's certainly not new. I was also surprised when you talk about it by the Republican address that they didn't go after Obamacare much more pointedly than Cathy McMorris Rodgers did. She spoke very generally about how it's not the Republican approach and they don't think it's a good idea and it puts too much power in the hands of the government. But I really thought that they were going to go for the jugular on Obamacare and talk in a very granular way about all the problems that it's having, but she didn't.
Well, two other issues, immigration and gun control, probably didn't get as much lip service as some people either predicted or thought they deserved to. Were you surprised by that? And is that at all an indication that the president is not as optimistic about there being major legislative progress on those two issues in this year?
I was not surprised. When it comes to immigration, Republican leaders have made it very clear to President Obama, look, the biggest way you can help us move immigration reform forward in the House is to stay out of it. Don't get involved because that's going to turn some of our more conservative members off. So let us do this our way. So for now, he's standing back watching to see if these Republican principles for immigration reform that the leadership unveiled at their retreat in Cambridge, Maryland, are going to end up translating into real legislation. When it comes to gun control, I think he gave, one sentence to this issue in the speech. I think a lot of Democrats were probably disappointed by that, but I think it reflected the reality that it is highly unlikely that anything is going to happen on gun control in Congress this year. So I think that the White House made the calculation, we're not going to make a big push for gun control when we know a year from now someone's just going to look at this speech and say, well, that's just another thing that the president wasn't able to accomplish this year.
Well, lastly, to some actual progress. The House cleared the Farm Bill this week. Not an easy task, and that's sort of been the end result of years and years of struggle on that bill. And yet, not a lot of people heard about it. I don't know that the media exactly gave it as much attention as perhaps it should. Were you surprised that the passage of that bill, at least in the House, obviously it's heading out to the Senate, didn't get more attention? And if so, why not?
I think partly it's because the Farm Bill is pretty complicated and it doesn't sort of lend itself as easily to a soundbite. It's not as sexy as, say, some of these other issues, but it's still very vitally important to a lot of people around this country, not just those who have been waiting for about a year to see what farm policy was going to look like in this country, but also to a lot of people who were waiting to see what Congress was going to do about food stamps, which are tied into the Farm Bill. The Senate is going to take it up next week, so things are moving fairly quickly. And as of right now, we don't anticipate any major problems with this passing in the Senate just as easily as it did in the House.
All right, Nancy, tell us about what we can expect to see on Face the Nation this Sunday.
You got a pretty good show with Bob Schieffer this Sunday, Patrick. You've got the White House Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, will be on the show. I'm sure Bob will ask him all about some of the priorities that the president laid out in his State of the Union and how realistic it is to accomplish them. And he'll also have on the House Majority Leader, Eric Cantor, fresh off of the Republican retreat, who can talk about what areas Republicans might be interested in working with the president in the year to come.
And then after the show, who are you going to be rooting for on the Super Bowl, Broncos or Seahawks? These are the important questions, Nancy.
Seahawks, closer to my home state of Hawaii.
All right, I like it. All right, Nancy Cordes with CBS News. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Sure thing, Patrick.